All right, we're going to jump right into lesson one. And I'm super excited to tell you about this lesson and go through it because, as I mentioned before, a lot of us just don't have the cheat code, right? We see all these people succeeding and we're like, how do they know what that means when we're on a campus tour or we're looking at a website? Well, I'm going to let you know that there's a ton of terms that you can find out today. And whatever I don't go over in this particular lesson, there's a glossary at the back, and remember, Google's always your friend. We're going to put shame aside and feeling like we should know it or that there's something wrong with us for not knowing it and accept that we don't. And we're just going to go ahead and learn today. So if you want, you can take notes, but all of these terms are going to be in the back in the glossary. The glossary would just be the blanket definition, but I'm going to give you all of the sauce, all of the tea, all of the salt, all the seasoning, so that way it makes sense to you. So, when you're looking at different institution types, right, you're going to hear all of these different things. So, you might hear HBCU, HSI, PWI, and essentially it's just a grouping of the students that are there in the majority, right? So, HBCU, historically Black colleges and universities, this came out of our history in the United States when there was segregation, right? And so, most professionals that you're going to see over the age of 60 or 70, a lot of them are going to have gone to HBCUs. I personally went to Howard University for my graduate work, but there's plenty of them out there. You're going to find like Florida A&M, you're going to find Spelman and Morehouse. There's just so many, and you're most likely going to find them in the South. The most northern ones you'll find, like for example, there's Morgan State in Baltimore. And so if you're looking for a HBCU experience, if you identify as Black, or even if you don't, but you want that particular experience, you want to look up HBCUs. PWIs are going to be the majority of the institutions out there. They can be large or small, but the majority of the students are going to be white. It's just a predominantly white institution. How did we get that term? Mostly these terms you'll hear in research, right? So when any individual is doing research on institution types and they say, well, where did you do this? Oh, I did it at a large PWI. And so in case you wanted to know that, that is what PWI stands for. That's going to be everything from your Ivy Leagues, your liberal arts colleges, your state schools for the most part. And so PWI, predominantly white institution. And then we have HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution. And so these are institutions with the majority of Hispanic individuals who go there, but it's open to everyone. And so you can go there. A lot of times they're going to have a little bit more of their history as a general core curriculum versus maybe the US history that focuses only on our particular country. A lot of times they might focus on their own diaspora and what that looks like. And so if you're looking for a certain experience or you want to be a part of a certain majority group, especially for those who identify as Black or Hispanic or Latinx, these are some other options for you. So if you've been in a PWI in high school and you want to do something different, you can look at an HBCU or HSI. Or if you've been at a basically majority Black or brown high school and you want to go to a predominantly white institution, that's fine too. I do want to let you know, I remember working with students who went to 99% Black and brown students. So Black and brown, we would say like Black and Latino. Sometimes there might have been some Asian brothers and sisters that were in those particular schools as well. But for the majority, it was Black and brown. And so when you look at that, I do want to let you know that it could be a little bit of a fear, right? You might say, well, I've only been around this demographic, right? I don't know if I'll be accepted at a PWI, or vice versa. Maybe you fall within the BIPOC community and you've never been at a place where there were mostly BIPOC individuals within your school. And so this might bring up a fear. I know my students used to say, I wonder if they're going to like me, if we'll be accepted, especially with everything that's going on in our country with racism. It could be really scary. So remember, when you're looking up different types of schools, you want to find a place where your soul is accepted, right? Like where who you are, your identity, what you bring to the table will have as least resistance as possible. And because our stories are not a monolith and all of us have different experiences, it means that you can fall in any of these categories and feel comfortable, right? And so I know sometimes people will say, well, what's the point of going to an HBCU or HSI because the world is not like that? That it doesn't matter. These schools prepare students to be professionals just as well. And so, if that's your concern, I would really, really have you look at alumni of these institutions and see that they're thriving in majority white environments for their professional career. And so, just make sure that wherever you decide to go, that you write down any concerns, any fears that you might have, any hopes that you might have. And then when you start to research these schools, you look for that data. So at the back of this particular chapter, there's an activity called hopes and fears. So if one of your hopes or one of your fears falls into the category of what type of institution will I be at? If I'm at a PWI, what are my hopes? But also, what are my fears? And so you can actually start to write those down. They're okay to have both hopes and fears because we can be dualistic and we can have duality. And so when you write it down, just make sure that you ask those questions if you're on a campus visit or if you know an alumni of an institution. But don't be afraid or ashamed, like I mentioned before. We're going to leave that at the door. So there's other types of schools and like categories that you're going to start to see as well. So a public school, what does that mean? A public school means that your tax dollars cover it. So with public schools, these are going to be your state schools for the most part. So a lot of times with state schools, you're going to have a large majority of those individuals from your state and a smaller out of state or international population. So these schools usually have a discount or a price for those who are in that particular state. The reason being is because you or your family members have been paying taxes that goes and gets funded to this particular state school. And so you get a little bit of a discount. So you're going to see differences in prices. So let's say that I want to go to the University of Michigan, but I am from California. Well, you know what? I can totally go to University of Michigan, but I'm going to have to pay the out-of-state price. And if I am from Detroit, Michigan, right, I can pay the in-state price. So you're all going to get the same experience, but I would need to pay a little bit more if I'm from California versus if I'm in-state. These schools are usually going to have some sort of tiers, right? Most state schools, you're going to find the community college. You're going to find maybe smaller state schools, and then probably your research one larger institution that might house your big sports teams. It doesn't mean that those other schools don't have them, but those are probably going to be the premier ones, right? So there's going to be University of Michigan, and then there's going to be Michigan State, and then I'm sure they have, maybe I'm just going to make this up, Detroit Community College, right? So all of those are going to have your in-state option for payment and then out of state. So if you want to be around individuals within your state, it's closer to you. I totally think that you should have at least 2 state schools on your list because they're cheaper. And a lot of times you have the ability to commute in case your financial aid doesn't come through. So that is where you can look for public schools. Now, with that said, a public school, the sticker price, especially if you're in state, is going to be a little bit less than the private school. So let's go ahead and transition to the private school so I can kind of tell you a little bit about the differences between the two. So private schools can be large or small, right? Just like a public school can be large or small. The size of the school doesn't matter. It just means that the private school is funded privately, not by state funds or federal funds. So when you have a private institution that you want to go to, a lot of times it's funded by donors and by tuition. So these particular schools might be a little bit more competitive, or they might not be as competitive because they need the tuition dollars to keep the school running. Again, there are public schools out there, like I'll mention again, University of Michigan, one of the top schools in the country. Just because it's a state school doesn't mean it doesn't have a reputation, right? Your private schools are going to be your Ivy Leagues, your small liberal arts and colleges kind of schools. They're going to be kind of your mid-sized schools as well. So the majority of the schools in the country a lot of them are going to be private schools, right? Now, private schools, the sticker price is going to be a little bit higher than those of the public schools, especially if you are in state. But when we get to the financial aid chapter, I don't want you to be moved by the sticker price because the sticker price at a private school might be $50,000. And at the public school, it might be $20,000. But if the public school only gives you $10,000 and your balance is 10, and the private school, which is $50,000, gives you $45,000 in scholarship and your balance is $5,000, then you actually have a better deal at the private school with the higher sticker price. So we don't want to just look at sticker price. Again, I'm going to teach you all about financial aid, how to understand how much money is there. So if you like a school, you can put it on your list, and we'll do list next. And then once we get to financial aid, you can start to tailor that list and trim it down a little bit. All right. So again, private, public, a lot of times they can be in the city, they can be in like suburbia, they can be in rural areas, they can be right outside of a city, they can be integrated in the city, they can be fully closed off campus. None of that matters if it's public or private. That just matters the design of the school. So I just want you to know that. So there's a difference between public, meaning that tax dollars funded, and private. Usually it's funded by donors and by tuition. So you have research institutions. So there's going to be like heavy research, mid research, schools. A lot of times you'll hear it as tier 1, tier 2. So what does that mean for you? Research institutions mean that their faculty not only have to teach, but they also have to produce research. So that research can be in the lab, that research can be in the field, that research can be through writing books. So a lot of times their time is like kind of split between teaching and research. This is really important because in these particular schools, a lot of times you'll find that they're doing a little bit less of the student faculty interaction. And if that is so, that's okay. A lot of times these really large schools that are really big on research are really awesome because you get to learn from faculty that have done things. You might be reading their textbook in the class, but it might also mean that they have an advising center. So maybe you don't get to really meet with your academic advisor in the department that you want to study in the first year. It might also mean that some of your classes, because research universities usually have PhD students, it might mean some of your intro courses, the first couple of years, might not be taught by full faculty. It might be taught by PhD students. But again, that was my experience. I went to a large state school. I went to the University of Connecticut for my undergraduate work and my learning. And I met some really amazing PhD students that I got to really talk to and kind of understand what their process was, to then understand what it's like to be a student. And they taught me really well. And at the end of the day, we go to doctors and sometimes it's a resident that's treating us because they have to learn somehow. So these PhD students are just learning on the job, right? And so they're well trained, they're learning because one day they're going to be a professor. And so research institutions, you'll find that, right? A lot of times they'll be titled university because I'm going to teach you this in a second, but a university just means that they offer a bachelor's, master's, and a PhD or a research degree. Now, your liberal arts schools usually going to be a little bit smaller. So the smaller capacity of liberal arts schools mean that your faculty probably will teach most of your courses. Your class sizes might be a little bit smaller, right? And a lot of time, these professors could have experience in the field. So maybe not on the research side, but they might have been in the industry. So when I worked at a university who was really known for their criminal justice forensic science program, a lot of the professors had been in the police force or had been in the CIA or the DEA or in the FBI, and now they were teaching. And so instead of saying, oh, in research, we found this, they would say, hey, in my job 10 years ago, we had this case. Let's dive into it. So both of them are useful, right? Because without research, there's no practice, right? So without these research folks in these particular universities, those who are in the field don't really know how to best serve the community that they need to serve. And so they go in tandem. It just depends on which one will fit you better for your first stop in education.